What's going on YouTube? Thanks for tuning into the channel. Welcome to Oso Simplified. Coming to you with a video here about 3 keys to manifesting your dreams. Like, comment, subscribe. Dislike if you don't like. Leave some negative comments. Any feedback will do. Just please engage a little bit. Help me out. So this video, as always, the format is going to be give you a little bit of a summary in the beginning so people that want to hop off can hop off. Deeper dive application my life following. So let's just jump right in. I'll get into some other housekeeping items towards the end, but first part, to give you the summary, the 3 keys. Number 1 is going to be having faith and conviction in the unseen. So understanding that everything in this world starts first as something that is unseen and then is brought into the material world as something that is seen. When you hear people say, you know, they have a great vision, that's generally what people are talking about. The ability to believe in something that you cannot physically actually see. And there's a phrase that I think I got from somebody, I think his name is Robert Edward Grant. He writes a lot of like esoteric type stuff, but he basically says believing is seeing instead of seeing is believing. So having the belief in something gives you the ability to then see it. And it's the same thing as if you've had like a revelation about something. Now that you have that thought on your mind, you see it everywhere, which can, you know, be part of like the reticular activating cortex and things of that sort, but not to get super scientific. First step, faith and conviction in the unseen. The second piece is understanding the 2 cells that you have, resistance and the higher self. So in general, I feel like there's 2 main voices that people have in their heads generally. Resistance, which would be anything that's pulling you away from the goals that you ultimately have. So this could be doubt, it could be just a lack of motivation, self-pity, etc., pushing it off, procrastination, do it tomorrow, those types of things. That would all be resistance. I got this phrase from Steven Pressfield. He has a great book called Turning Pro on that, that's just focused on resistance, and a larger book that comes out where this originally started is The War of Art, where he talks a lot about this. But that would be the one voice. And then there's the voice of the higher self, which is usually the voice that's, you know, where a lot of your aspirational type of thoughts come from, a lot of your dreams of, you know, what you could do, you know, when you have these like visions of yourself doing things that are beyond your ability at this moment. That would be the higher self. And the interesting thing about this is that it's not very hard to differentiate between the 2. But it does seem like resistance in itself is easier to follow, because generally the bait, if you will, is something that's pleasurable in the moment, where it's the opposite with the higher self, where generally the payoff is something more in the distant future, or is a feeling that is, once again, kind of like little less tangible than the things with either the lower self or resistance is what I like to call it. But it's very easy to differentiate, and it's harder to make the decision. But what's hardest is the fact that no matter what decisions you make today, so you can follow your higher self perfectly to the T one day, you go to sleep, you wake up on the next day, you're basically start from 0 again. So it's a daily choice to choose to stay more aligned with the higher self, and it can even be moment to moment, than the resistant self. And that's really the second piece, which is just being more aligned with things that are going in the direction of what you want to do, as opposed to the resistant self. And then the third piece is going to be leaning in versus forcing. And I think when I get into the deeper description, this is where I'm going to spend a lot of time, but it's this idea that you know what you need to do, and generally things that you need to do can be done one step at a time. What we like to do as just human beings in general is we'll put something off for days and days and days and days and days. Then the one day you want to do it, you're going to try to get everything done in that one day. Kind of going back to that point number 2, that you know that you're going to wake up the next day and not be as in tune with the higher self. But I would consider that forcing it, because you're really trying to make something happen in your time frame instead of just leaning into the idea that who I want to be is more aligned with the higher self. So I'm going to daily not do any extreme action, just do the actions that are aligned with the higher self and just lean into that way of being instead of trying to, force and do something. And I do come from, like, I'm not like studying, but like my maternal lineage, if you will, the religion is Buddhism. So I do have like certain, just ways of thinking that I think do more align with Buddhism. And there's kind of this concept of whatever you push away is going to come towards you, and whatever you pull towards you is going to run away from you. And the way I look at it is like anything you push is going to push back, and anything you pull is going to pull back. So what you want to do is when something is pushing towards you, to kind of go with it. So if you don't want it, be cool with pulling it towards you, because then it'll pull itself away. If it's something you want, be cool with it kind of leaving you and pushing it away, because then it will push back into you. So that's kind of the idea there. So that's really it for the summary. You want to hop off. You want the deeper dive. Let's get into the deeper dive. So we'll get into this first part about the conviction and faith and believing in things unseen. So there's a book that I read, it's called The Science of Getting Rich by Wallace D. Wattles. And one of the big components of that book, and at the end it's like talks about the idea that there is a thinking self, that if you take everything to its logical conclusion and zoom all the way out to the beginning of where all this started, and let's not get into the minutia of exactly how it started, there is a thought process where you'd have to believe that everything in this world, if there was a singular moment of a big bang or whatever was created, that everything that is now comes from that singular point. And that there is some sort of organizing principle. If I set off a bomb today, in 1,000 years, there will be life forms that will still grow in that complete destruction. There is some sort of organizing principle, whether you want to believe in a deity or whatever may have you. And in this book, it kind of tries to tie this to, and it seems like it was written in like the 30s, so there is a little bit of anachronistic language in it. But it basically is kind of saying there's a thinking self or consciousness that is tying all of this stuff together, that you are a part of that consciousness, and that's kind of the thoughts you have in your brain are part of this consciousness. And anything that happens in this consciousness is what is ultimately bringing the material things. So us as humans, we have this stronger ability than other forms to think of something to bring it into existence, because we have a really quick access to this consciousness. So anything that you're looking to materialize first has to materialize in your brain. And if you take it to its logical conclusion, everything that exists is coming from the brain of like the universe, if you will. So like, what is telling the oak tree to grow? What is telling, the squirrel to run up trees? It's like there's this organizing principle within everything that is having an effect on the physical world. And honestly, to listen to me, you kind of have to just believe that, or most of the things I say were just gonna be, like sophistry. But that's really what I mean by the believing in unseen, is that this is like kind of like a real thing, that everything is coming from this thought process. The universe itself is just a mind. Like the same gravitational pull that's keeping all the planets in orbit is part of this mind that produces things. Now, they might not be making the so-called, and this is getting deeper into esoteric thought, because I take everything to its logical conclusion. They might not be making decisions the way we feel like we're making decisions, but then again, I can question you on that. If I say, raise your right hand, when did you make that decision, or was that decision already made? At what point did I make that decision? When I said it or when I did it? It's like a very weird thing, but I digress on that point. But the main idea is that everything comes from thought, and your thoughts have an effect on the material world. So believing in your thoughts and following that will eventually, without doubt, have to bring it into the material world. And I think Dale Carnegie said this, because I listened to this one Brock Proctor book a bunch of times. That actually has that Wallace D. Wattles book at the end, where it says anything in the mind that is either feared or revered by law must come into contact with the material world. So anything that is feared or revered, and if you think about anything you fear or revere, it gets stuck in your mind. In the thought that you're having so much, it has to come out into the material world, because your thoughts are interacting with the thought of the overall universe. So that's the first part in terms of manifesting your dreams. The second part is this resistance versus the higher self. So this is where I'm going to get a little bit deeper into like my kind of views on alternate realities, and if you do any studying on different dimensions, that there's different dimensions as well, you know, beyond the third dimension that we live in today. But I almost view it like there's multiple outcomes that you could be, and it's almost like the thinking self that's like importing things into your mind is allowing you to have two different voices. You're allowed to have this resistant voice and then this higher self voice, and it's like there's two realities that will happen dependent on which voice you follow more. And you can almost sit into each one of those voices and then take it to its logical conclusion of what this is ultimately going to lead to, on that realm. And when you're making these decisions, once it's a daily decision, it's a moment-to-moment decision, which voice you're going to follow, and it's going to once again affect the believing is seeing thing that I was talking about before, because whatever one you're following, whatever thought you're giving more attention to, is the thought that will come up into the material world. Once again, the feared or revered piece by law has to come into effect. And there is a great Native American proverb. I had to shoot this twice, so I don't know if I already said it, but it was like, basically it was saying that there's two wolves, like there's like a good wolf and a bad wolf on your shoulders, which I think can be said in many different ways. If you're a Christian, it could be the angels, whatever. If you're more in the way I think, it could be the resistance or the higher self. But there's two ones there that are always talking to you. They're always fighting. They're always fighting for more and more control. And then the person that was like hearing this from like the shaman that was explaining, you have both of these. The kid that's like talking to him in the story, so it's like he's explaining, he's like to the kid, he's like, there's two, there's the wolf that's good, there's the wolf that's bad, and they're always fighting for room in your head. And then the kid says, which one will win? And he's like, the one you feed the most. So it's really just focusing on, as much as you can, feeding the higher self more than resistance, and then your end reality in the limitless possibilities of realities will fall more in line with the higher self if you are feeding that method of thought rather than the resistance thought. So that's probably the simplest one that you can kind of get in different words from many different books. But the first part I think is very pivotal. That's a little bit different than a lot of people would explain. And then this last part is going to be something that is a little bit novel as well, which is the leaning in versus forcing. So at many times, and I'm going to use a metaphor to describe this. When I think about people that, you know, actually, this is actually a good example. They did this study with, it was either gerbils or rats, but it was one of them, or hamsters or something. I don't really know the freaking difference. But long story short, everybody knows like a hamster wheel, you know, like they like to run on the wheel. That's something that they very much enjoy. So they would do these tests on these hamsters. And the hamster there was a hamster that's running by free will, and then they tied a rope to the other one that this hamster has to run if the other hamster runs. So when that wheel runs, the string pulls it, so they're both running. Now this one runs. When they tested their levels, essentially the hamster that had was being forced, completely negative. like when they tested it's like mood and depression and all these other things by dopamine and serotonin. I'm not a scientist, but it was depressed that was like in that case. And then the one that was running on its free will, it basically imposed to the same exact stimulus, is having a great time, is they're in a positive state. And that is because it was not being forced, it was doing it through choice. So I do feel like a lot of the times, and this is going to be, I might be already jumping into the myself category, because this is really, this third part is where this video came from for me, is that a lot of times with my goals, like I try to really force myself to do it. I'm like, you can't do this and don't do that, and you gotta do this and you gotta do that, and it really takes out the joy in what I'm doing. It leads me to feeling like I'm burnt out, and then once again it makes me like my expectations are not met, because generally when you're forcing something, you try to do it in too quick of a time. I'm not just leaning into the idea of this is what I want to be. So regardless if I have any external returns, it's going back to the first part. I'm believing in what I'm seeing in my head, that I know this is what I'm supposed to do. I'm just leaning in to the new person that I'm going to be, rather than forcing myself to be something, and then the way you're going to try to validate or corroborate that you're doing the right thing ultimately is going to have to be from some external piece that once again is not the focus, because everything is really created through the thought realm. And many times when any of us have goals, and a lot of the paradigm of the way that the world is set up today is that it's like always about like forcing you to do this and forcing you to do that. You gotta force yourself to the gym, you gotta kill yourself in the gym, you gotta kill yourself when you do this, you gotta work hard, you gotta burn midnight oil. But it's like when you see the people that are really successful, you can tell that they have kind of a method of walking one foot in front of the other, which is very easy, rather than trying to sprint 100 miles. You know, walking 100 miles, it might take you a while, but almost anybody could probably walk, let's say 20 miles, make it easier. You can walk 20 miles. It's not the craziest thing, or 10 miles, not the craziest thing, but to run it at a full sprint, almost nobody can do. So that's where, forcing it from my standpoint is something that a lot of people fall in. And I think that's the biggest pitfall, is that you just need to lean into your goals and just become that person. And whether it's one step at a time, it's like the story of the hare and the tortoise, slow and steady wins the race. And then once you can get your pace going, then you can start putting those aspects of the hare to speed up and move forward. But it's really just leaning in and making the little decisions of the person that would be this person, listening to your higher self, instead of, it's like almost like you're trying to feed two masters at once, where you're like listening to your resistant self saying, you can't do it, and then you try to go into your higher self and say, well, I'm gonna just do all this, and if I see it, then I'm gonna feel like I'm doing it. And then that's another aspect of forcing it. And then also, whatever you get through forcing, you're going to have to keep forcing to keep it. So do you really want to keep something that you had to like force yourself to do, which has these implications that you don't ultimately want to do it? So that's another piece that I think is very important in terms of the manifesting of your dreams, is to really lean in. And that's really it for this one. I see my blinkers coming up on my camera, so I want this to finish while I have this thought process. So, believing in, having the faith and conviction in the unseen, understanding how to differentiate from your higher and resistant self, and then also leaning in rather than forcing in terms of, moving forward on the correct path. And this is probably going to be more of the avenue that I take the channel moving forward. It's more about this type of stuff rather than, how to make money or how to work out. I'm going to create an MMA channel as well. Stay tuned for that. That's going to be a whole different type of topic, but I just wanted to kind of leave that there. But if you like the content, like, comment, subscribe, leave negative comments, negative likes, whatever. Either way, anything will do. Really appreciate anybody that's coming in, watching these all the time. I watch a lot of this stuff on the manifesting, because I got some big ideas I'm looking to create this year. So wanted to bring it to you guys. But that's it for this one. You know what it is. Peace.